Hey, it's Bradford. We got another WoW TCG Classic deck tech. Today we're going over Spider Solitaire. This one is, I'll use the word classic again. This really is a classic deck, and everyone should try it at least once. It's a great deck. It's really fun. Let's get to it. The point of this deck is to abuse graveyard synergy, mostly a keyword called Death Rattle. So look at the bottom there. Death Rattle. When this ability enters your graveyard from anywhere, your hero deals 3 fire damage to target hero or ally. This is basically a lightning bolt that sometimes you can just cast for free. Just for free. So, yeah, doing things for free is what this deck does, and it's really good at it. So let's look at the Death Rattle cards first. These are really the cards that, it's funny, previously everyone kind of thought most of these 3 were pretty useless, and then they exploded when this deck finally took a lot of practice and work from the creators of it, and it took over the scene. So we saw Incendiary Totem. It also has, you can play it at the start of your turn. It will bolt something every turn for 3 damage, which is fine, but really this thing's in the deck because it goes into the graveyard and you do some damage with it without paying any mana. Next up, let's look at Stormstrike Mace. On the bottom, that is the Shaman symbol. So whenever this thing has Death Rattle triggers, whenever it touches the graveyard, we get to ready a hero or an ally. So this is basically discard this object and then untap a hero or an ally. Then Uruka the Cutthroat. She is a 3-drop 4/3. Sometimes we cast her, but most of the time we just try and throw her in the graveyard. You choose ability, ally, or equipment. The opponent reveals his hand, and they take 1 damage for every card of the kind that you guessed. So if they're like an aggro deck full of allies, just say ally. Maybe you'll get 3 or 4 damage. If they're a control deck, usually name ability. If they're the weirdo equipment deck, name that. Yep, this card has kind of more bolts to hit the graveyard, except these can't target creatures. They can only deal damage to the opponent's face. But hey, doing damage for free, I'll take it. And you got the classic Broderick. This deck gets more Brodericks into the graveyard than most other decks, so you're going to often have Assault 2 to 3, and it adds up really quickly. So let's look at our enablers. This first 2, these are basically the best 2 cards in the deck. You're never going to think of it that way because they don't feel like they do that much, but they make the deck work. If you get rid of these 2, the deck just doesn't work anymore. Let's look at Grazzle Grubhook. He's a 2-drop 2/2. He's got time is money. That's this game's version of haste, except you can't attack. You can just use your tap power immediately. So he has tap, draw a card, discard a card. So he's a hasty Merfolk-looter. What's important is that you can do this as soon as you put him into play, but you can also put him into play and wait till your opponent's end step to trigger this ability. And that's really key for playing around cards like that little 2-mana hunter that everyone plays, the Blue Alliance Hunter that shoots people when he untaps. So in order to play against that card, you'd want to keep this guy untapped until your opponent's turn. But anyways, this is just one of the key cards of the deck. Get it out as soon as you can. Try to keep it alive and survive, and this engine will keep you going. We also have Elemental Vision. It's not nearly as good, but it's still fun. It's instant as well. Pay 2, look at the top 3 cards. Put 1 into your hand and the other 2 into your graveyard. So you don't really get to control what goes in your graveyard because you don't get to control what's on the top of your deck. But sometimes you get lucky and throw some good stuff in the graveyard. Otherwise, it's just a decent instant ponder type card selection. We have 3 of these Calamity's Grasp. It's kind of expensive as the equipment. It costs 4. And it's a weird equipment. You have to 2-for-1 yourself. So it's instant. When it comes into play, choose ability, ally, or equipment. You can discard an ability, ally, or an equipment, and then kill a card of the same kind. So we have plenty of abilities, allies, and equipment. I'm tired of saying that. We have plenty of those cards. So you can use those cards to... This is just a nice little universal weapon. It also happens to be a weapon, so yeah, you can end up killing your opponent with it, and sometimes you do. But it's really there because it's both an enabler that you can use to trigger these cards. You have ability, ally, equipment. Okay, I'm done. Next up, we have this card. This is a quest. When you put it into play, you mill yourself for 3, so put the top 3 cards of your deck in your graveyard. You can also pay 3 to draw a card. You'll do that in the longer games, but this is here as a free enabler. And you should play it. Actually, this deck has a lot of training wheels. It takes a long time to learn how to play it. Sometimes you're like, should I open up with this card to try and get Brodericks in my graveyard? Or should I swing with my hero first to try and get a Stormstrike Mace to hit the graveyard to untap my hero to attack again? There's lots of decisions to be made. Like, do you do this now and bolt something, or do you try to wait after combat after your opponent has tried to use a trick? There's a lot of, even though it's just like, all I'm doing is playing a quest. It has a lot of playability to it. Next up, this one. This thing costs 8. Pay 8 to draw 3 cards. Or the other thing is discard an ability, ally, and equipment, and then you get to draw 3. Oh, I said I would stop saying that. But anyways, so it's pay 0, discard 3, draw 3. And you can choose to set this up in a great way. Like, you won't always have the sweet cards in your hand. Sometimes you'll have like a Calamity's Grasp as your only equipment. Maybe a good ability like a Wind Shear or something. But sometimes you just need to get the cards that are not relevant out of your hand and draw some good cards. It also serves as an enabler to help discard these Death Rattle cards later on. This is a one of, and many people won't even play with him, but I think he's fun to at least try out. He's a 4-drop 4/4. When he enters play, tutor your deck for an ally, or well, I guess for any card, and put it in your graveyard, which is neat. You can use him to cast a free bolt or trigger one of these for free. You can also use him to fetch the one of Anub'arak. So you can pay 4, cast this creature, put him into your graveyard, and then you can pay 2, if you still have mana left up, and basically cast this guy out of your graveyard for only 2 mana. Now you have to remove a bunch of cards from someone's graveyard, but what a great little plan that your opponent just thought he had a 4/4, now you end up with 10/10 out of 10/10 worth of attack from only 6 mana. That's a great little play. He's also good at killing opposing graveyard decks. So anyways, that's our enablers. Lots of ways to discard. We have some universal removal here. And we've got some card draw selection between this, and this. And then this is kind of a tutor target. Or at least a tutor. He himself is the tutor. Interaction, good stuff. So some of these cards are just good. Some of them we use because we really need to stay alive. Squall Totem. It only costs 1 when it enters play. Exhaust all opposing heroes and allies. And then it stays in play, and you get to tap down something anytime your opponent attacks with one thing at a time, which they do. So you'll always get to at least tap again unless they burn it with some kind of ability. For 1 mana, this card was a little bit of an oops, I think. It's just way too strong for 1 mana versus the aggro decks. Only 1 mana can completely mess up their turn. You can still be progressive with your own game plan. And there's some weird rules. I would need someone else to confirm these, but you can see the little health in the bottom right. Technically, this totem is an ally, and there's been some back and forth on this, but I think that these abilities count as both allies and equipment for the purposes of cards like this. So, discard an ability, ally, and equipment. What if you just have 2 totems and an equipment? So you can count 1 totem as ability, the other totem as an ally, and then discard an equipment. So they're versatile as well. Moving on, we got 2 or 3 Wind Shears in the deck. 2 cost instant. It's an interrupt target ability, or you can use it to tap a hero or an ally, or you can do both at the same time. Usually you'll save this as an interrupt, and occasionally you have to use it as a tap to not die. So that's cool. It's in the deck. It's nice to have a little 2 mana versatile interrupt. We have 1 more in the sideboard too for those matchups where it matters. Feral Spirit. This card's bonkers. It costs 4, and you get to put 2 4/4 protector tokens into play. So let's do the math on that. Pay 4, get 8/8 worth. Sounds pretty good. And it is. If the game's nice and neutral and there's really nothing happening and you just cast this, it's a bad time for your opponent. Like, you get a 2-for-1 immediately, and then they have to kill 2 different 4/4s on turn 4. That can be really rough for a lot of decks, especially if your opponent's playing like a weapon-based deck and he has to rush his face in to kill 1, or maybe he did like 1 damage to 1 and he's going to swing in and to try and finish it off, but you can use the other wolf to protect the one that's damaged. There's a lot of things you can do with this card, and if you're able to, this is the card I would try to just consistently keep casting and keep trying to get this card from your graveyard, keep trying to pick this card. It really doesn't have any graveyard synergy, it's just super good, and this thing will win games on its own. We also got an Edge of Oblivion. Oh, on this card, I know these cards are protectors. You really want to prioritize maybe keeping a protector back to keep this Grazzle Grubhook alive, because he is one of the main engines of the deck, and if you can keep him alive, it's sometimes better to not deal 4 a turn with one of your dogs and instead have your engine alive. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's better to just deal the damage a turn. That's another thing that's weird with Grazzle himself. Sometimes you really need to learn to just start swinging for 2 and stop drawing every turn. So again, the deck's got some a lot of things you can learn from it. Edge of Oblivion, we have 3 copies of this. This costs 4, 0 to strike with. Enters play with 5 attack counters on it. At the start of your turn, it goes down 1 every turn. Pretty nuts, though. You get to pay 4 and immediately swing for 5 at something. And then the next turn you can swing for 4 at something. This also works really well with our hero. So it's repeatable removal versus creature decks. It adds a ton of pressure versus just the opponent's life total between Broderick's in your graveyard, your creatures in the field, and the fact that it can swing. It combos with our hero power. Pay 3, ready your hero and a weapon. So if your play is turn 4, play this, swing for 5. Next turn, swing for 4. That's so at 9 damage. And then pay 3, untap, do it again, swing for another 4, put your opponent at 13. If you have no Broderick's and no other damage in play. That's a really easy... That's a one-card combo that did, what did I say, 13 damage. So, for 7 mana, this plus this, or this axe plus your hero power, that's a nice finisher, and you need to be aware of that math anytime that you're trying to go in and try to finish the game. So if you have 7 mana in play, you're able to just cast it, swing for 5, untap, swing for another 5 for 7 mana. That's great. It's 10 damage. Moving on down here to payoff cards. So one of these quests, Conversing with the Depths. This is a slow and grindy one. Pay 3 to complete. Draw a card for every 5 in your graveyard. So you kind of need to keep track of that. If you're playing on this program, it's pretty easy. You just hover over the graveyard. But sometimes you're removing cards from the graveyard. You just have to really plan your turns out. Because sometimes you'll have 13 or 14 cards in the graveyard, and you really would prefer to draw about 3 off this. So you want to aim for having 15 or more cards, but sometimes you just need to draw. So just consider that when you're playing. I've also seen this thing draw like 5 before, so that was pretty crazy. My opponent got lucky and drew 1 while the game was, we're just grinding to a halt, and then he's got half his deck in the graveyard, and he draws 5. Like, I can't come back from that. Astral Recall. This is pretty nuts ability, too. It's slower, it's grindy, pay 4, remove this ability from the game, and then you can put an ability, 1 ally, and 1 equipment from your graveyard into your hand. Since we're all about putting those things into our graveyard in the first place, being able to selectively pull them back out is so powerful. This card reads, pay 4, draw 3 of the best cards from your graveyard. That's the best way I think about it. You can grab your Calamity's Grasp back out of the graveyard if you need to kill some universal. You can grab a Wind Shear to prep for a later turn. You can grab a Feral Spirit to make a bunch of dogs. You can grab an Edge of Oblivion that ran out because the counters naturally go down on it, so when it runs out and sacrifices itself, you can grab it back and just start over. You can get a Squall Totem as your ally and then get a Windshear as your ability. You can have, same thing with Incendiary Totem, maybe your opponent's really low. You can just grab 2 of these out of the graveyard, or maybe 1 of these and 1 of these allies out of the graveyard, and then complete this quest and just drop them back into play for free. I mean, these are the kind of things you get to do with this deck, and it's pretty crazy. And whenever you cast this, you have to remove it from the game. But sometimes you just mill these into the graveyard. So you can use Astral Recall to grab another Astral Recall in the graveyard, and then a couple other things. And just start this card advantage train going. Alright, and then Spider Solitaire. The namesake card. This is the Spider. So he's a 3-drop 3/3. But if you have an ability, ally, and an equipment in your graveyard, he becomes a 3-drop 6/6. A 3-drop 6/6 that you can untap with Stormstrike Mace with any number of these discard abilities. So if you're swinging in for 6 and you even untap once in the same turn and swing for another 6, like hitting someone for 12 in addition to doing all this free damage and having Broderick's as free damage and having reach and having control and having a huge weapon and having these Feral Spirits. Oh, it's a pretty good deck. Alright, let's move over to the sideboard. I got Munkin Blackfist, 2 of these. He's a 2/4 protector and he can destroy some of your opponent's equipment. Need that in some matchups. Bandit the Inevitable, pay X. It costs 2 to play, and then you pay X, sack it, and destroy each equipment that costs X or less. You can only do this on your turn, so you can't really trick your opponent, but it can help if you do this on like turn 5 or so. So you can pop off all their 3 or more 3 or under equipment, which a lot of decks rely on just a bunch of 3 or under equipment. It's just basically a third way to kill equipment. It's way more devastating than this. This is just a 2-for-1. The 4th Calamity's Grasp, it's just universal removal, so why not throw it in? It already works with the deck. You just don't need 4 that often. Vuz'din, this is the kind of card that you can easily add a couple of these to your main deck. You could probably take out this Spider and maybe a Anub'arak and whatever else you want and put some more of these in the main and the side. He helps a lot versus the ongoing abilities matchups. There's a whole bunch of them, so get used to that. 1 more Windshear just to have 1 more interrupt versus the decks where you really need it. Windshear Totem is also an interrupt. It's the 5th copy of the interrupt, because we already have 4 Windshears total. There it goes, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is like a 5th interrupt just to have. They won't expect it. It's also a totem and an ally, so it gets to sit in your graveyard, and if, for any reason, if you need to pull it back out of the yard later with Astral Recall, you can do that. 2 more Squall Totems. So we have the full 4 of these. This is really useful against like the Winter Twin combo deck, or any aggro deck that attacks a lot, or even any solo decks that are relying on their hero, like weapon-based paladins, rogues, or warriors. And last up, another Anub'arak. He's great in the grindy matchups and the graveyard-based matchups. Well, that was the deck. I'm sure we could go on all day about it, but this is just the kind of deck you want to get in there and play, and if you don't know how to play it, just play against someone who does, and they'll rock your world with it, and then you can sit back and just start grinding games, because this is the deck that the more you play it, you start to really appreciate how much effort went into building it and the skill of the pilot. I've never seen a deck in WoW TCG that can transform from control deck to free combo deck to card advantage to aggro. It can do so many things with this little set of cards here. However, you are a graveyard-based deck, so if your opponent's bringing their graveyard hosers and they get you, you have to rely more on cards like Feral Spirit and Edge of Oblivion and less of the unfair cards, but you can just start casting these creatures and try to win that way. Anyways, that's Spider Solitaire. This thing's going to be around forever, so try to get some games in with it. Have fun.